I went from 0 to 100 army tradition in less than 40 years with only losing 20,000 troops in total and without fighting a single war. I'm the student and I present the ultimate EU4 army tradition guide. So in the last few days I was actually asking myself, how the hell can it be that we don't know how exactly the biggest modifier, the most important army modifier in the entire game works? Because let's be honest, we all had a lot of battles in EU4 where we ask ourselves, I lost so many troops, why did I gain 0.2 army tradition? Or a battle where I lost very few troops and I gained 20 army tradition or something, right? So if you really want to know how exactly army tradition is calculated, how it behaves, and how you can abuse the mechanics of army tradition to gain 100 army tradition without any wars, so without any big army losses, then this is definitely the right video for you. Because once I googled, where the army tradition comes from, how the army tradition behaves, I actually saw a Reddit post that claimed to actually say how it works exactly with a formula and so on. And I tried to replicate it and it was sadly wrong. It was sadly not the right calculation, but it was almost right. And that's why I did a lot of testing. And now I can finally say I now know the formula for army tradition and how to actually abuse that for your advantage. So let's get into the effects of army tradition. Because before we can get to the actual trick and to how army tradition can be gained in large amounts without losing a lot of troops, first of all we have to understand how army tradition works, what it does, how it is lost, how it's gained, right? So therefore I will start with the effects. You can see that on the screen right now already, that these effects are totally crazy, okay? The effects are 25% morale of armies, 10% manpower recovery speed, 10% recover army morale speed, 5% siege ability, and 5% loyalty equilibrium for nobles. And then there's also a hidden 0.1 militarization if you have that militarization reform, of course. On top of these insane modifiers, there is also a hidden modifier, which is of course recruiting generals. Because recruiting generals is directly influenced by your army tradition. Now this means, for example, you can see over here that I can actually right now, as I have 100 army tradition, roll a leader that has minimum 7 pips and maximum 18 pips. Okay, and this is, as it says down there, the base modifier. So that would mean that those modifiers from ideas and missions and reforms and so on, those modifiers come on top of this base from the army tradition. Now in terms of the decay, because there is obviously decay, you cannot keep 100 army tradition for the entirety of the game, except you stack a lot of modifiers, of course. But normally there is a base decay of 5%. Okay, you can see that over there. Base value of decay is 5%. That would mean that if you have 100 army tradition, the base loss is 5 per year. But you can also see that I have a bunch of modifiers, the 1% that comes from the aristocratic ideas, that is actually a very easy one. There's also a policy for humanist and quality that gives the same -1% decay, as well as there is a 0.5% decay from a nobility privilege that literally every single nation can take. This one over here, it also decreases general costs, so very nice to take that one every single time basically. As well as also innovativeness gives an entire -1% decay for 100 innovativeness. So there are a lot of modifiers that you can stack that make you lose less army tradition by default. Then of course there are several ways to gain army tradition. And you can see already one over there, which is a modifier, static modifiers of army tradition gain, which, for example, is from the last jousting tournament, +1 over here, as you can see, as well as fully maintained 4s, which basically means you need 1 4 at the current 4 level per 50 development that you own, which I, of course, have. And then if you maintain that, you gain +1 army tradition yearly. Okay, and now we come to the main sources of army tradition in wars, which is first of all sieging. Every siege that you directly control and is won grants you +2 army tradition flat. Okay, so that is a really nice source of army tradition. If you are a big nation, you siege a lot, you fight a lot of wars, right? But then there is also the other way, which is battles. And battles is actually the most interesting one because no one really knows how it's actually calculated. There are so crazy numbers coming around sometimes and so low numbers coming around sometimes that it's really weird to see. The army tradition from battles equals lost in battles divided by the total force limit of the entire war side. Okay, so for example, let me see, for example, over here in the Ottomans, there is a war of the Ottomans versus the Mamluks here right now, right? So if the Ottomans right now win a battle, as this one over here, for example, the Ottomans gained 0.9 army tradition, as well as Hormuz gained 1.4 army tradition, okay? Now, of course, Hormuz has a really low force limit, right? So if he loses like 8k troops over here, then actually that should be a lot of army tradition for him, right? But no, it is not a lot of army tradition because his entire war side of force limit counts, which is in this case force limit of Mamluks, Cyprus, Hormuz, Adal, and Ajuran. Okay? All of these force limit combined make the force limit in the formula. So if you want to calculate how that got to 1.4 over here, you would actually calculate those army losses over here, and then you would divide that by the force limit of all of these nations combined. Okay? That would be the army tradition, basically. But then there is a flat modifier that is applied to that because, you know, if you do that, you would get like 0.1 army tradition every single time. So there's a flat modifier of 20, which you multiply that with. So the entire formula is battle loss divided by total force limit of the entire war side times 20. And then there is also an additional modifier that applies if several nations take part in the same battle, which is basically not relevant for the calculation of the single nations, because what it basically does is if there are 2 nations in one battle, then the modifier is doubled because there are 2 nations. Okay, if there are 3, then it's tripled. But then the tripled or doubled army tradition is then evenly split out of every participant nation. Every single participant nation in a battle gets the exact same army tradition out of that exact same battle, and that is actually even if only 1k troops or something are in there from one nation and like 20k from the other nation. It literally doesn't matter. Every single participant gets the same army tradition that is calculated with battle loss divided by total force limit times 20. But that was the base calculation, right? But let me just tell you the side facts of that. Battle losses are calculated with their exact amount of losses, actually. Okay, so if you saw that right there, you know, he lost like 5,381 troops, then every single of these 5,381 soldiers that died actually counts, okay, for the calculation. The force limit of the war side is also calculated with the exact amount, which means also with the decimal numbers. If you have a force limit over here, you can see that this force limit is not actually 10, it is actually 10.9, okay? So this exact number is taken for that, and then it's added up with all the war participants on that side. So as I said, in this case, you know, with Mamluks, Cyprus, Hormuz, and so on, all of that together, that overall number is rounded down to no decimal number. the resulting army tradition of a battle is rounded to the first decimal place. So there is no such thing as 0.01 army tradition or something. It's rounded down to the first decimal place. Now it gets interesting because of stack wipes. Every single stack wipe only counts the lost troops in battle, not the stack wiped remaining troops. Okay, so if you lose like half of your troops, then you run out of morale, then you get stack wiped, but for the army tradition, those stack wiped troops are not counting. Okay, but there is a flat 0.2 army tradition bonus for every single stack wipe, also for insta stack wipes. That also means that if you are above 100,000 force limit, then getting a 1k stack wiped gives you actually more army tradition than losing the same 1000 manpower in battle. Mercenaries give no army tradition at all, and condottieri actually give army tradition. But the number of rented out condottieri is added up onto the total force limit number of the calculation, right? And there actually comes the interesting trick that I wanted to show you, how I got to 100 army tradition as Britannia without any wars. And that is, of course, condottieri. So the thing is that actually what I said is that every participant of a battle gets the exact same army tradition, even if he only has 1k troops in that battle, okay? So what you can do is you can rent out 1k condottieri to a nation, and then you can attach that condottieri stack to, you know, the fighting stack of that nation, right? Such as I did over here with the Ottomans over here, right? And then this nation is going to run around and fight battles. And of course, you have only 1k troops in that battle, so you are maximum, you know, at maximum losing 1k troops. But the AI nation is actually losing like 10k troops in a battle, for example, right? Now, even though you have only 1k troops in there, you still get the entire army tradition that that nation got for losing 10,000 troops or 20,000 troops. So this way, I could actually make sure that, you know, I rent out condottieri to nations that have a pretty low force limit, but still lose a lot of their troops, right? So for example, I rented out condottieri to Tunis in a war versus Castile. There was only Tunis and Granada, so those nations combined only had like 20k force limit, right? Now they got attacked with my condottieri stack in that army, and they lost like 10,000 troops, right? And therefore it was a lot of army tradition for them, and therefore it was also the same army tradition for me. I got simply 4.1 army tradition for losing less than 500 troops. And then also a very useful thing is the Irish minor wars versus England. Because England is, of course, in the early game going to unite Ireland very quickly. And if you now rent out condottieri to the Irish miners, you can even do that in advance, before the war even started. Then England is going to stack wipe these troops with your 1k stack in there. And therefore they actually gain an insane army tradition because they lost their entire force limit of troops, right? And guess what? Even though you have only lost 1k troops, you still get the same amount of army tradition. And therefore I got literally 10 army tradition for only losing 1000 manpower. And I did that basically left and right and everywhere in Europe, because of course there are a lot of wars in the HRE as well, Poland, Lithuania, Castile, Morocco, and so on. And this is the way how I got to 100 army tradition without a single war and without losing more than 23,000 troops. Now actually, if you decide to send condottieri for the winning side, then it also means that you gain a lot of prestige, because battles of course also give prestige, and that prestige from battles is also evenly shared between the participants of the battle. So actually, if you, for example, rent out condottieri to the Ottomans, as I did here, they are going to fight insane amounts of wars, and every single time you are in their fight stack, they are winning battles left and right, giving you prestige and army tradition. While you only invest a very, very minimal amount of a few hundred men that die in these battles. So actually you can have a look on the current wars over here and see all the wars in the world. Actually, even though you haven't discovered nations, you can still see that. So for example, Castile has a unification war over here against Naples. Now you could, for example, rent condottieri to Castile, right? Now the problem is you can't really send troops without these troops having access to the capital of Castile, right? Now, the easy thing that I was using to actually rent condottieri out to literally every nation I want is that actually if you end a condottieri contract, so let's just say, you know, I was just in a war with France and that war ended, and I can now revoke those condottieri, you can see that they will, of course, after one day, get black flagged because they have no access, right? And now the interesting part is black flag nations can walk everywhere, okay, including over nations territory that you don't have military access to, which means that I can now literally rent this condottieri stack out to literally every nation in the world, including, for example, Castile. So I can rent out this black flag company over here, but not this company in my capital. And this is basically how you rent out condottieri to every nation you want to. You just have like 1 or 2 black flagged 1k stacks chilling around in Europe, and then whenever a war comes up, you're just going to send the condottieri immediately in and get a lot of prestige and arbitration. But anyways, that is it for today. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you learned something that you can use in your games as well. And we are going to see, as always, on the next Monday.